What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dishcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Monday, February 17th, 2025. And I'm joined, as always, by ScoopDuck owner and publisher Jadon Hopkins. We haven't done one of these episodes in a little while, but we have plenty to get into to update you guys, our listeners. We got a new wide receiver coach coming to Eugene, it looks like, and a new transfer portal commitment. So all that and more is on the way in today's episode of the pod. J-Hop, how are you? First time seeing you since we were out in Nashville.
Yeah. And we probably don't recall entirely the way we finished the night seeing each other, but we had fun nonetheless. And that's what happens in Nashville. Nash Vegas is it's a lot of fun, but you gotta hydrate. That's for sure.
You definitely do. You definitely do. It was a fun trip out to Nashville, literally like 49 hours for me out there. I know you stayed a little bit longer. So I got to see some family, got to see you and a bunch of the On 3 crew. I think one of the highlights of the night, though, Justin, had to be crushing that pizza at the spot that you wouldn't stop raving about.
So, I have to look up the name. I don't even remember the name of that pizza place. I've been to Nashville probably around 10 times. We'll just say 10 times. And I'm pretty sure out of the last 5 or 6 times I've gone, I have hit that pizza spot every time. It's awesome pizza. I think they're open till 3 or 4 in the morning. But if you go in there on like a Friday night, it's just off Broadway, a couple blocks. But if you go in there on a Friday night at like 2 in the morning, it's hard to get a seat. And they have pizzas flying out the door. Like those guys, that thing just, I think it prints money. I'll tell you what, that pizza is absolutely a life changer when you need it.
For sure. For sure. Maybe we'll get a J-Hop pizzeria out there in Oregon sometime in the future. Would that be a possible business venture?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be a Dave Portnoy and go around, tasting pizza all over the country. Kudos to him because he does a lot of great things for very small businesses and makes them more profitable. But yeah, that's my pizza spot in Nashville. If you're in Nashville and you need it, you need a recommendation. I'm telling you, I talked Max up to it, and it delivered 100%.
It did. It did. I could use a piece now, honestly. I'd be down. Um, but apart from the food talk and Nashville talk, let's get into some of this Oregon news, Justin, because we're at a very good point right now. Don't look now, folks, but we're over halfway through the dead period. Thank God. It's a nice little, slower time, but then it's like, hey, I want something to write about. But we got something to write about and talk about, and we've been doing a whole bunch of that over at ScoopDuck.com. Oregon has a new reported wide receiver hire, or a guy they're expected to hire, and that is Ross Douglas from Syracuse. He was on Fran Brown's staff as the wide receivers coach and passing game coordinator in 2024, and he also had stops at the NFL level with the New England Patriots. And I want to say he was at Rutgers as well. That's where he got his start in coaching as a GA, played at Rutgers and at Michigan in his playing days. So about a week or so, Justin, after losing Junior Adams to the Dallas Cowboys to coach the same position, it looks like the Ducks have their man. We're just waiting for it to be announced.
Yeah, this one, caught all of us off guard, not just you and me. I mean, it wasn't any. You didn't have Matt Zenitz, you didn't have Pete Nakos, you didn't have Pete Thamel. Nobody was linking Oregon to Ross Douglas, myself included. So I'm not taking any credit. So to me, that feels like Dan Lanning did that on purpose, wanted it kept low key, didn't want to have a bidding war because all of a sudden everybody figured out this guy might be available, or start looking into him, or, hey, look, if Dan Lanning likes him, maybe we should get him too. So, this, again, some of the names we looked at, and just, again, there was a lot of different ways Dan could have gone with this hire, right? Could have moved Samples over, could have hired a running back coach, could have, done, he had some options, could have gone to the NFL since the NFL season's done. This one on the surface looks like a very, very strong hire. We don't really know a ton about his recruiting resume. Obviously, the 1 year at Syracuse here last year did recruit fairly well. But what we do know and what we can see is that this guy's a hell of a coach, like a hell of a motivator, hell of a teacher, hell of a coach. And those were some of the things that I posted on the site over the weekend about someone that had worked with him and just spoke to the level of coach you're getting here. So one of the nice things, if we're worried about recruiting, one of the nice things is when you show up to Oregon, it kind of recruits itself. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that you have to be like the world's best recruiter to get guys to come to Oregon. If you can be competitive NIL and build relationships and show these guys, what kind of work you do, you're probably going to be pretty successful recruiting. So with this guy being 30 years old, I have no doubt that he's going to be able to relate to 17, 18, 19-year-old young men and getting them to come to Oregon.
And that was one of the things that I liked about the hire, or at least that caught my eye at first, was that he's only 30 years old. And this really continues a youth movement for Dan Lanning in Eugene, especially on the offensive side of the ball, right? Will Stein's young, Rashad Sample's young, Alik Terry, he's young. I think Drew Maringer might be the oldest offensive staff member, if not Stein. But it's kind of a fun little development on this Oregon staff. And I think it speaks a lot to the confidence that Dan Lanning places in his hires. And he hasn't necessarily missed yet. All the guys that he's brought in have done a good to great job. And I think that with Ross Douglas having some of his background in the NFL, I think that is an added bonus for sure. I was texting somebody today, and maybe the Bill Belichick offenses and the wide receivers haven't always been the most prolific outside of the Brady years. And of course, that was a majority of his career. I think when you take away a guy like Brady, you can see, okay, what is the coach kind of really, really made up of? But that was like one of the greatest NFL dynasties we've ever seen. So I guess you look at the value from that, but you also have to take it with a grain of salt, I believe. So case in point, he's been around good coaches. Fran Brown did a terrific job at Syracuse in 2024. The big little nugget that everyone was attached to this hire was that Ross Douglas helped lead the number one passing offense in college football last year. And I don't think a lot of people expected that with Syracuse when you looked at the conversation around college football. So I'm pulling up some of the stats here just so we can see some of the numbers and some of the receiving leaders that you had. But the top three receiving leaders here for Syracuse last year, 1,021 yards, 941 yards, 934 yards. And I believe that one of those is a tight end here, Rondé or Gadsden. So these guys put up really, really good numbers, and Douglas played a big part of it. So just looking at his kind of relatively limited resume and track record, everything seems pretty positive. I mean, I'm not going to go and be one of these people on social media that's saying, oh, Lanning hired a guy, that's a home run hire for sure. But the early signs and the digging that we've been able to do lend itself to being a pretty good hire so far. But we got to see what happens when we get to the spring.
Yeah. See what happens in the spring. Obviously he's going to have a number of important phone calls to make and start. Everybody knows the number one thing is making sure Decorian Moore sticks around, right? It's the elephant in the room. Like there's been absolutely no reason to believe Decorian Moore is going to leave Oregon, but let's all just call a spade a spade. He needs to develop a relationship there and not give him any reason in the spring window to decide, hey, I'm going to go somewhere else. I don't think that'll be the case. I think Oregon's in great shape. Their coach Samples is a really big part of that. So I would put that as a very low concern at the moment, but that's what he's going to do. And it'll be interesting to hear the feedback from recruits as he kind of gets set up in Eugene. And then in a couple of weeks, he can actually get going on the recruiting trail. Because again, we're in that dead window. Not much he can do other than, hey, here's a board of guys that we want you to start calling in 26 and 27, when March 1st hits. And so that's going to be what Dan Lanning, these guys are doing with Coach Douglas, getting him ready. So, but again, what I like most about this hire and what you were just talking about a moment ago is, what was Oregon's weakest area of its offense last year? The downfield passing game, right? I mean, that just was the weakest point of the offense. So now you brought in a guy, and obviously he's not going to be the offensive coordinator, but he's probably going to now have some input and some things to help Coach Stein kind of evolve, the passing offense and maybe getting a little bit more downfield action. And with Decorian Moore and with Evan Stewart back, you're going to have the guys on the team to be able to do that. So it feels like an area that Oregon wasn't especially strong at got strengthened up in recruiting and now with this talent acquisition. So it'll be interesting to see all that. I don't think we'll get any answer on that in the spring. So I know we'll be looking for it. I mean, we know Dan Lanning, right? He's not going to give away anything. We're not going to see anything in the spring game that, other than guys walking around and doing a glorified scrimmage. But again, it'll be fun for us to talk about, fun for us to cover, and then, we'll kind of see what really happens later in the fall.
And on the limited vertical passing attack, downfield passing attack, I think part of that we can probably admit was tied to Dillon Gabriel's arm strength. Not to say he had a poor arm, but for the times that they did take shots, it kind of felt like they were doing just enough, and then at times probably not enough. So we're probably going to be in a different situation with the Oregon offense next year with Dante Moore, likely the guy that takes over there. He's a little bit taller than Dillon Gabriel. Has just wicked arm talent. As far as arm strength, I think it's there, but I want to see him some more, because we haven't really just gotten that good of a look at him in the last year or so since he's been at Oregon. The other thing with Douglas, he's inheriting a great room, even though you're losing some key pieces with Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden, who I believe were the two statistical leaders from a season ago. Evan Stewart comes back, so that's kind of going to be the guy that you look to build your passing offense around, at least in the immediate future. But you have some really talented guys. DeCorian Moore, I'm glad you mentioned him, because everyone's kind of wondering, okay, is he going to stick around? And I don't think that, I mean, Junior Adams is a huge part of DeCorian Moore coming to Oregon, right? But we know that Rashad Samples played a big role with the Duncanville ties, with the Texas ties. And I feel like DeCorian is kind of dedicated to Oregon along this line, along this narrative of being different, of leaving your traditional home state of Texas or somewhere nearby like LSU where he was committed, and just doing something different, kind of pushing the envelope and trying to set a new standard, a new wave out in Eugene. So I think that is something that is reason to hope that he's going to stay. And there's no, again, like you said, there's nothing that points to him leaving, but that's just a natural question that comes to your mind. And then you have someone like Kyler Casper that I think could be in line to take a leap this year. Justice Lowe is back. Let's see some of the receivers that we could talk about. Jurion Dickey, Jeremiah McClellan, Dylan Gresham. So there's guys there, but not a ton of top end production. So I think there's going to be plenty of snaps up for grabs, which is honestly exciting.
Yeah, I think Dillon Gabriel was plenty capable of throwing the deep ball. It just felt like he was hesitant, or he didn't trust it, right? Didn't want to turn the ball over. So we saw what I felt like was a much more like a safe mode of Dillon Gabriel. Like, hey, we can stay in this game if I just don't throw picks, right? Which is probably relatively fair. But I think this year, obviously getting Evan Stewart to come back is big because of his talent alone. But I think he'll be able to be used in more of his natural way, a way that will utilize his skill set better, basically taking over the spot that Troy Franklin had. So I think that's going to make better use of Stewart, and you'll see him with more catches and a bigger return there. You said it, and I want to hit on it. I mean, we all know about DeCorian Moore, and we're expecting big things, and I do not expect him to transfer. Coach Samples was a bigger part of that recruitment than Junior Adams was. I'm confident in that, and I'm confident that everything is going to be fine there. But I think it's the return of Kyler Casper, getting him back and healthy, and just the mismatch he provides. Yeah, you're going to rotate him with some of the other guys we were talking about, J Mac and Lowe and some of the others. But I think there's a real chance for Kyler Casper to find just kind of a real niche role and being able to be almost like, a tight end that is obviously super athletic and a huge red zone target. So that really, to me, indicates because of DeCorian Moore, because Evan and Dante Moore, and because Evan Stewart's in more of a natural role, I think we'll see the pass game evolve this fall.
Can't forget about Malik Benson as well, the Florida State transfer that's going to be joining the Ducks for the 2025 season. One more thing I wanted to hit on, Justin, with Ross Douglas, was just his recruiting outlook, right? Syracuse and Oregon, we know that they're on completely different levels when it comes to recruiting, but there were a handful of guys that I remember seeing in either the portal or the high school cycle where I was like, dang, that guy's going to Syracuse. And I think the big one that a lot of people will know, I think his name was Byron Washington, the big, massive DeSoto offensive lineman. I believe he ended up committing to Syracuse. So I think that is something to look at. And when we look at the receivers that Douglas was able to get at Syracuse, I think I wrote about this yesterday on ScoopDuck. He was kind of able to identify those key areas that Syracuse has a realistic shot at getting some of these guys, like the New Jersey area. Some really, really good players come out of New Jersey. The local guys in Syracuse, you look at Darian Williams, a 2025 wide receiver at a Christian Brothers Academy, but then you also dabble a little bit in Philadelphia, which sends out good players as well. I think I saw someone from Florida. So, I mean, he's doing what he can to get some of these talented wide receivers to come play for him. And he's from Ohio. So when I think Ohio, I think Chris Henry Jr., Oregon's top wide receiver target. And it's important to note here, Oregon hasn't taken a wide receiver commitment in the 2026 class yet. That's not to say that people haven't tried to commit to Oregon. Maybe they've been turned away, but I think that's more than likely the case. Oregon has a really strong start in this class, but they know how important it is to get really quality wide receivers and guys that are more likely than not to make an early impact for them. So seeing that Chris Henry is an Ohio native, I heavily doubt that had any impact on the hire for landing here. But I kind of just view it as an added bonus. And we kind of say it a lot with some of these younger guys that come to Oregon. Okay, recruiting's kind of a young man's game ish. It's really an effort thing more than an age thing, I think. But maybe this is a guy that comes to Oregon and just really finds that new gear with the guys on Lanning's staff and more importantly, that Oregon brand.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to walk into these high schools with an O on his chest, and that right there, is going to instantly give him an in with, Chris Henry Jr. or these other top guys. And like you said, the Ohio connection is just an added bonus. I guarantee that was nothing that, Dan Lanning's like, oh, I got to go get this guy at Syracuse because he's got an Ohio connection. Like, you're not doing that. You're looking for a guy that does what you need and feels. Again, I think it's bigger that, the way Syracuse's passing attack was last year. I think that's something that Dan Lanning says, hey, look, this guy is a teacher and a motivator and a coach. Let's take all that, take his expertise and recruiting. I mean, he's 30 years old. He's going to be just fine recruiting. I have no doubt about that. He's played ball. And this really, what he's going to lean on most is, hey, look, I was with the Patriots. I was under Bill Belichick, in just a couple years of coaching. I became a position coach under Bill Belichick coaching wide receivers. That right there, you're just going to slide that on the resume at the very top. And, Oregon recruits modern day well. So he's going to have no problem getting in there. Even though he has no West Coast ties currently, it's not going to matter. It's not going to matter. You can build those easily. And like you said, it just becomes an effort thing. You start getting those guys on the phone. You get their parents on the phone. You get their 7-on-7 coach on the phone. You get their trainer on the phone. And you start, again, sliding that resume that says, here's who I am. And here's some of the things I've done. I can't wait to help, develop your young man to get to the next level because let's face it, more and more, I mean, college football is basically just becoming the minor leagues of the NFL. Like, that's what we're doing. We are now basically becoming a developmental piece of the NFL. And that's how these guys that are getting paid NIL, that's how they're going to start looking at it. And so I think that's why we're seeing colleges, not just Oregon, but colleges overall, going more and more and grabbing some of those NFL guys and pulling them back down. A, because of that, and B, because the salaries in college football are now competitive with the salaries in the NFL, which they were not for forever.
That's a wild point. I'm glad you mentioned that there. The last thing I'll just add here before we get on to our next topic, Justin, about Douglas is I'm curious how much, if any, we'll see a reshuffling of the wide receiver board because there were already guys that were offered out there and they may not be priorities for Ross Douglas. But I also think to some degree, because there's some overlap with the wide receiver position at Oregon, I think there will be some collaboration with Rashad Samples, like we saw in the 2025 class. We know he was huge for Decorium Moore. He was also the kind of final piece for Cooper Perry because he recruited Cooper Perry pretty heavily when he was at Arizona State. We know, of course, that's in that not too far from the Phoenix area. So overall, it sounds like we both like the hire of Ross Douglas for Oregon. Still waiting for it to be officially announced, but all signs are pointing towards that. I know you confirmed that and wrote it over on ScoopDuck earlier today. So good stuff there. We did see a transfer portal commitment in the last week for Oregon, which was honestly pretty surprising. But exactly a week ago, the Ducks got a commitment from former Ole Miss and Tulane defensive back Jadon Canady. Justin and I were trying to figure out how to say his name, but we were pretty sure it's Canady. I saw a broadcast clip. Yeah, they get another defensive back in the secondary for the 2025 season. 1 year of eligibility left. A little bit on the smaller side. I think he's listed on the Ole Miss roster at 5'10", 175. We're seeing the tweet here from Hayes Fawcett that lists him at 5'11", 185. So TBD, I guess. We'll have to see what he ultimately comes out to. But this was a commitment that caught both of us by surprise. And I couldn't help wonder at the time if it had anything to do with Kobe Savage declaring for the NFL, if they wanted another body in the secondary. But doing a little bit of research, it seemed pretty apparent to me that this is a Chris Hampton guy because, of course, they were both at Tulane at the same time. But what did you think about this commitment for the Ducks here, Justin?
Yeah, nice surprise, right? I mean, I think, at this point, like with the hire of Ross Douglas, we're going to trust the coaches on what they think their roster needs, right? So far, Dan Lanning might not have been absolutely perfect in the transfer portal, but he's hit on a pretty high success rate in his time at Oregon. So, I think the Jadon Canady thing, like you said, I do think that this is a direct reflection of the Kobe Savage news. They're not the same player. They don't play the same way. I'm not saying that, but I think, again, you're starting to look at, okay, we lost a body back here. What can we do? Who can help us? And you go and you grab, Canady, and, to me, he looks like a guy that fits in 100% right at star. Probably going to play a lot of snaps at that position. But as we know, they move their guys around. Like they bring their guys up in the box. We saw, Brandon Johnson. We saw him move around last year, playing at the line of scrimmage and then dropping back in the secondary. So, again, I think this is a compliment to the room. It's a depth piece. It's another guy that you'll probably see playing out there, probably in the 2 deep. But let's not pretend that this is, Dylan Thieneman 2.0. It's not. I mean, Dylan Thieneman is probably going to come in and be Oregon's best defensive player in the fall. And, this is a guy that I think comes in and does what we've seen before, kind of bridges that gap, because Oregon's in a spot right now where they necessarily haven't been, where there is young talent there now. And that's whether they were a 2024 or 2025 signee for Oregon. You've got some talent coming in now, but it's young, right? And I think you want to see them get some snaps, but you still need that bridge of an experienced player, not only in the games, but in practice, in what they do off the field, and when the coaches aren't around. You need those veteran presences around to help bring the young guys along. So I think that that's a really good fit here for that. I think that's a big reason why they were hoping Kobe Savage would come back, but it just didn't feel like that was going to be an option for Savage to come back, because he was applying for eligibility, and who knows if he would have gotten it or not. So, again, it surprised us. It's probably not something that, if you asked Dan Lanning a month ago, that they were planning on bringing Canady in, but with the way things shuffled out, it was a nice thing that they at least had him warm and had that option available to be able to do this.
And I think the other thing about this, Justin, is that I would think, I haven't confirmed this, but I would think you're not adding Canady if it's a situation that's going to push out someone else that you're really excited about. I think that's the other thing that comes with roster management. You can't satisfy everybody when it comes to a lot of these transfer portal commitments. I mean, it's kind of like being a journalist. You're always going to upset somebody, right? No one's always going to be 100% liked all the time and everyone loves what they're doing. That's just not the way the world works. And I think that's kind of a similar way with the transfer portal. Someone's always going to get their feathers ruffled. I guess pun intended here, because we're talking about the Ducks in a situation like this. But I think this raises the floor of the safety position for Oregon, or the star position in 2025. I think it is interesting when you look along the lines of Brandon Johnson, because this guy just looked like he was crushing it earlier in the year. And then as the season kind of went on, we didn't hear a whole lot about him and wasn't making as many impact plays. But it seems like, from what I've been able to gather so far, I'll have a story out probably later today on Canady on ScoopDuck, talking with some of the Ole Miss folks that covered him and got to see him, was that he's someone who's not afraid to kind of come downhill and put a hit on you, and moves around relatively well. He's someone who's obviously really experienced. So I think that goes a long way in just finding Oregon finding someone they feel comfortable putting out there at safety, which we know is a really, really important position, just getting the defense set in every game. And as far as the other guys in the room, Justin, the one I'm going to continue to pound the drum for is Kingston Lopa. He is someone I've just heard so many good things about this offseason. Everyone I talk to is super excited about him, just an athletic freak. I think that you maybe look for him to have a similar impact as Brian Addison, maybe because they have similar body types, but I think he's probably more athletic than Brian Addison was, and the ceiling for him is much higher. But you're looking at Kingston Lopa. You talked about Dylan Thieneman. Aaron Flowers is another one from the 2024 class. He was an All-American that people were excited about. And then you also have Peyton Woodyard as well in the mix there at safety. So things are looking good for Oregon at safety, and I think that Canady is going to be a good piece of the rotation there.
Yeah, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. The secondary for Oregon was not in great shape when Dan Lanning took over, and they've lived in the transfer portal to make corners better, to make the safety group better. And now they're finally getting to a point. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't just recruit one class and say, oh, we don't need the transfer portal anymore, we're good. That's not how it works. You go and you start getting some of those guys, develop them, put some depth in behind them, and then hopefully you're going to be, less and less reliant on the transfer portal. This was another big transfer portal class for Oregon in the secondary, but I think we'll see moving forward, it will be less and less the next 2 to 3 years because that they've been able to transform those two position groups. And lastly, and I'm going to say it, it's an elephant in the room. There's a reason you go and get Canady. It's February, mid-February. We have no idea what's going to happen with Dalen Austin's investigation, right? And that's the guy that we assume will probably will assume a bigger role at star nickel this season. Anything can happen there, and if for whatever reason he's not able to play football in the fall, it leaves you with a big hole that now you have depth, or this guy beats out Dalen Austin. Whatever the case might be, you're not left standing flat-footed, pun intended there, because it's safety talk. And now you've got options, and, if Dalen Austin's able to play with no issues, that's great. If something happens there and you don't have him available, you're not left in the cold. So, again, it's just a great depth piece, and we'll just call it insurance. It's insurance at a very important position on the field.
Other names to watch there, you could look at a guy like Solomon Davis from the 2023 class. He's seen a lot of roles, a lot of snaps, primarily on special teams. So is he a guy that can take that leap in the offseason? I've talked before about Ifeoma Badegwu potentially being a guy that moves from corner, maybe not. But I think that that's someone that the staff sees some positional versatility with to maybe move into the back end if they want to. But the secondary, aside from these like known transfer portal guys like a Dylan Thieneman or a Theron Johnson, I think those guys are probably more than likely both going to be plug and play starters for you. Aside from that, Justin, it's just like it's new blood, man. It's a ball of clay, and the staff is now tasked this spring with just molding all of it. So I'm super excited to see what this secondary ultimately looks like, and I hope that the staff can get it to a point like you had talked about and alluded to there, where they're able to move away from the transfer portal each and every year for the safety spot or the secondary in general. So lots of stuff to be excited about with yet another edition. We're coming up on the 30-minute mark, Justin. Just wanted to see if there was anything else you wanted to squeeze in here before we got out of here.
No, I know it's not the same. We'll get football back in a few weeks to some degree, but I mean, honestly, if you're just a sports fan in general and you love your Ducks, it's a pretty great time. Softball just got started. They're slamming the ball out of the park. Baseball just got started this past weekend as well. Basketball's kind of rebounding, pun intended, getting back with a big win over Rutgers and continuing to compete there. And I don't think it's been talked about. The women are doing a pretty good job on the hardwood as well. So if you like sports in general, I know track and field will get going, and we have a lot of track and field fans at Oregon, understandably. It's a pretty dang good time as far as sports are concerned, with all of the sports you have right now, and things ramping up on the diamond, and things kind of, getting intense on the hardwood for basketball. So just a great time. I wanted to acknowledge that, and at least, just say, hey, keep checking things out, because there's a lot going on.
Yeah, it's a fun time right now. I was watching some of the men's highlights from the Rutgers game last night, and the Ducks were really letting it fly from three. So it was fun just watching the ball movement, and for them to get another win at home, I think is tremendously valuable. So we'll see now if Dana Altman and his squad can kind of find their footing and hit a run here with some consistency as we hit a crucial part of the 2025 calendar here for hoops. But I'm going to keep a closer eye on the women's team too, because I feel like they've been playing really well, like you mentioned, and they're getting some wins. So a lot to keep an eye on in the world of Oregon sports. And we're just excited to talk about it with you guys over at ScoopDuck. One last note here is that we do have a little promo going on right now over at ScoopDuck.com. I'm pulling up the specifics here. It looks like you got $1 for 7 days, and then you roll into let's see here. Sorry, I'm rolling into it right now. Dang, I'm dropping the ball here. $1 for the first week, and then for the we have $79.99 for the first year. So check us out. Come check us out at scoopduck.com and join the community. Like Justin said, we love recruiting, but there's other stuff going on, and recruiting should be ramping up here as we get back into the month of March and come out of the dead period. So we want you guys to be a part of it, and make sure you follow Justin, make sure you follow me, and subscribe to the Scoop Duck On 3 YouTube channel. And thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you in the next episode of the Duck Stage Podcast.